I'm Reginald Bush, and I'm the Area Director for the White Plains Community Action Program, a program that's under the WestCOP, or Westchester Community Opportunity Program, umbrella. Our organization serves the hard-to-serve, the transitional populations, and mostly individuals and families who are under the poverty line. This is White Plains CAP Talks, and today I'm pleased to have Susan McPherson with us. Susan, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you, Reggie?
I'm well, thank you. So, who is Susan McPherson? Tell us a little bit about Susan.
Well, Susan McPherson is currently a director in a foster care agency. I have a very long career in working in foster care. I started many years ago. Ironically, I started right out of high school. I didn't even know what foster care was. So anyway, I went into a facility and began working, and my interest was planted from that point on. And that's been well over 30 years.
Okay.
So that has led, the extensive experience and background has actually led to a lot of the things that I'm currently involved in as it relates to advocating for children and family services. So I've gotten involved in a lot of community activities and organizations on behalf of children and families to try to inform the community of you know, what goes on in the foster care system, as well as to try to get leaders to get more involved in the foster care system. So that interest has led me to serve on several task force committees in Westchester County, committees in New York City, and just continue my day-to-day oversight of trying to provide the best services possible.
So you're saying advocacy, and is there a need for advocates when we talk about foster care and foster care system?
There is definitely a need. The foster care system is very complex, you know,
Is it?
similar to many other systems, but you know, when you're dealing with children and families and the issues that would result with children being removed from families, just that alone is complex. And then you're getting into a system that most likely the family is not familiar with at all. And there's so many rules and regulations and components to this very complex system. So, you know, a lot of times we get children that are going to end up in this system maybe their entire life, you know, maybe their entire youth life. And sadly, in those circumstances, they end up aging out of care. So there's a lot of room for a lot of improvements, especially when you have so many children that do age out of this foster care system, and they are ill-equipped. So that's a big problem, because then they become the responsibility of the community in some other fashion, and that's a problem.
So, and I'm going to come back to some of those points, because I want to talk about this age out scenario, because I actually happen to know a little bit about that, and from what I have seen, it can be a very ugly, you know, cut your knees off kind of thing. And I also want to come back and talk about the complexity of the foster care system, and the type of individuals that can find themselves in foster care. Because if I think about foster care, knowing very little about it, and I'll be very upfront and honest with you, I think, okay, here's some bad kids that no one can do anything with, or it's a bad situation family-wise. You know, it could be a drug-infested home. It could be, you know, absentee parents. You know, that whole latchkey kid thing, and they just get sent off. But I've come to understand from you a little bit that that's not true, and so I want to get into that a little bit, because I want our listeners who may not be familiar with the foster care system to understand those things, and if there's some way that people can help advocate for some of these things, because that that age opt-out thing,
Yeah,
we'll get
I
to
remember
that.
you were really.
Yeah, yeah, like what?
Funny.
You're kidding me, right?
Yeah.
But I want to go back because you mentioned that you belong to some task force and that kind of stuff. So what are some of those things that you are involved with, and what do they do?
I currently serve on the African American Advisory Board for Westchester County.
And I know what that is because I'm a former member of the
Yes, you
African
are.
American Advisory Board.
And we miss you dearly.
Well, thank you very much.
But on that board, I chair the African American Advisory Board is currently broken into 4 pillars, not broken but sort of divided into 4 pillars, and we cover economic development, health and human services, education, and housing. So I currently chair the Health and Human Services Committee.
And what does that mean?
Well, that means that there are issues and concerns that were identified about 2 years ago in an event that the African American Advisory Board hosted to bring the leaders of the community together to find out exactly what issues were impacting the African American community in those 4 areas. Based on that event, a document was created by us called the Blueprint for Change. And in that Blueprint for Change, there are recommendations in each one of those pillars that we intend to carry out. So those recommendations underneath Health and Human Services include such issues such as increasing board diversity in nonprofits that oversee a majority of African American communities.
And let me just stop you there for a second because, and I too belong to a number of boards and things across Westchester. But one of the things that happens that maybe the average person doesn't know is that many times you've got organizations, not-for-profit groups that are servicing African Americans and being driven by a board. And when you look around the table, there's none of us that look like us around at that table. And then it becomes a question of, well, are those boards really focusing on the real needs of those individuals? And it's not a bad thing, so I don't want it to sound like it's an ugly thing. But, you know, for example, if you are not of African American descent or African American, you know, some things you just aren't going to understand about being black and
Especially,
African, right?
yeah, especially in human services. In order to understand why people do the things that they do, okay, you have to understand their history. You have to understand their culture. You have to understand how they fit, how they feel that they fit in this society. So if you're not able to understand what leads to the behaviors that they are demonstrating, exhibiting to require a human service, then how are you going to, you know, respond to it? How are you going to come up with the solutions to a problem if you're not understanding the problem? So, you know, when you have the decision makers that are disconnected from understanding the people that they are ultimately responsible for making policies and practices over as it relates to services, if they don't understand the people, there's going to be a disconnect.
Right.
So it's very, very important to be able to have representation in the decision-making capacity over the majority of the population of people that you're serving.
And I don't want to harp at this point, but you're absolutely right, you know, and I'll just share. There was a situation. I was on a board, and the board was an affordable housing agency here in Westchester, and there was a staff member who had, you know, power because, you know, the individual was in the management chain, that were speaking to tenants in this very you know, looking down her nose, very demeaning way, and some of the, now you have to understand that most of these tenants are minority individuals and families. And so a lot of times they call me and they say, you know, this woman, you know, just, and in fact had a couple of them that said, you know, slavery days are over. And when we tried to, and I brought that to the attention of the executive director, and eventually we spoke with the individual, but she was totally like, but had I not been there, you know, because then it was funny because my colleagues on the board sort of didn't see where this was a big deal, but it is a big deal.
It's a very big deal, and especially when you're dealing with systems.
Yeah.
One of the other areas that I focus in on is disproportionality, systemic disproportionality of African American children in these systems. Okay. Systemic disproportionality involves systems such as the child welfare system, the juvenile justice system, the special ed system, the educational system in its entirety, public education. They are disproportionately overpopulated by African American children. So, and this is nationally. This is not, you know, just in certain spots. This is nationally. So you have to wonder, and these are systems that are not considered positive experiences. So the juvenile justice system, child welfare system, certain mental health. I mean, the largest mental health facilities are currently Rikers Island, Cooks County Jail. I mean, this is where, no, this is where people that have mental health issues end up, all right, opposed to an environment that can actually service their needs. So when you look at special ed, we're African American children overpopulate the special ed system. You know, and New York State has one of the largest populations of African Americans, and New York City has the largest population of African American males failing, not graduating from high school. Okay, so you have to wonder what is going on here. So when you have a child welfare system that is in Westchester County, 70% of the child welfare system in Westchester County is African Americans.
70%?
70%. And those are the numbers that pretty much are across the board.
Wow.
There are initiatives to reduce disproportionality in these systems. The juvenile justice system is somewhat like a feeding ground for the criminal justice system, and we know, you know, how disproportionality affects the criminal justice system.
Right, right.
But as it relates to just children, and that was one of the reasons that I created an organization called One Accord. And the One Accord stands for a collaborative coalition to overcome racial disproportionality. Our whole focus is to educate the community, because a lot of times we really don't understand where we are with these systems. I mean, we've come a long way as it relates to the plight of the African American community. However, when you look at what's going on in these systems, and the overpopulation of the children, the African American children in these systems, you have to wonder, where are we going with our progress? Are we going forward, or are we going backwards?
Well, and today there's a lot of upheaval about, and I'll use education as the example, with, you know, where are we going with educating our children? And one of the things that is sort of has been, although maybe it hasn't been a fight, is this whole special ed stuff. So I believe that there's this whole vacuum as it relates to special ed. The school systems, those school districts get money from the state based on those number of children that they say are special ed. And when we talk about special ed children, we're talking about people who have, you know, ADA, and there's some other things that affect them. And some of them now being medicated, so they walk around in this zombie state. And so how can you learn if you're sort of in this zombie state? And sometimes, many times, which people don't understand, is that many times these individuals don't really need that. They're not really special ed, you know. So
you have to wonder what's driving these classifications.
Yeah.
You know, how is the funding? that drives, that funds these classifications? How is that determined? Currently, African Americans, the majority of African American children have been labeled learning disabled. So if the majority of our children are currently classified as special education, where does that set us for the future?
And do some of those same children end up in foster care?
Well, actually, most of the children fluctuate between system and system. So, and that's another reason why there's a lot of study and research that is completed on the individual system. One Accord wants to be able to look at all of the systems that deal with these children, because children's fluctuate. The same child can fluctuate from special ed, juvenile justice, and foster care. So, you know, these same children are feeding each one of these systems. And there are legislative, and that's what we want to make sure the community understands. This has been going on for some time, and there are legislative mandates that address disproportionality. The juvenile justice system has had advocacy to reduce disproportionality for up to 30 years now. All right.
Really? 30
yes.
years?
And every state has what they call a disproportionate minority coordinator to address the issues in that state of disproportionality, overpopulation of African American children in their juvenile justice system. So that's every state. So they've been, and that's a paid, funded position. So you have to wonder, okay, for almost 30 years, the disproportionality rate has increased, which means we have more children. So you have to wonder what is going on with these systems that you can't find out how to reduce the overpopulation of African American children. Keep in mind, we're only 15% of the overall population. Okay, we're just 15% of the population. So how is it that we are 70% of this system? In New York City, the juvenile justice system, people of color, and that includes Hispanics as well, they make up close to 95% of juvenile justice system there.
Well, and that's what I was going to say. That I don't want to muddy the water, but as each community, not just in Westchester, but across this country, becomes more Hispanically populated, does that? Because I've got to believe in my head that that's going to be driving these numbers probably up, because some of these individuals are coming to this country from very poor countries and locations that bring issues. I mean, all kinds of things that are going on. So if you think about that, you know, my God, what's going to happen to the system?
Well, you have to figure out what drives the system's funding stream. I mean, New York City was paying close to $250,000 a year per child in a juvenile justice system. All right, now, how much does it cost to educate a child? So, close to $250,000 per year. And they get no services in the juvenile justice system.
Wow. Now, as we continue to talk here about children and foster care and that kind of stuff. So is that number similar in nature for a foster care child per year?
Well, a foster care child, first of all, when you come into a foster care system, you should be put into what they call the least restrictive environment.
What does that mean?
That means that there's levels of foster care. And the least restrictive level is for a child to go live with the foster parent in the community. That's your least restrictive.
That would be least restrictive.
The next level would be in a group home, where you live in the communities, but you live in groups with other kids that are similar to you. And the most restrictive would be a residential treatment facility where you live on a campus. Everything you do is on that campus. You go to school, you live there, so you're sort of removed from the community and in a restrictive environment. So when you come into a system, you really should be there should be a focus that you go into the least restrictive environment. Now, the least restrictive environment, probably the rate, the expense of being able to take care of a child in that environment is going to be much less,
of course,
than each one of the levels. So a group home is going to be more because it requires more services, and a restrictive facility is going to be more because it's more intensive.
So that middle, that middle scenario, is that, let's say a child comes to campus maybe for schooling or whatever it is during the day, and then they get on the bus and they go back home in the evening? Is that what?
Yes, they live in groups. They live in homes within the community, and they're called group homes. And a group home can average anywhere from 8 to 12 children.
What I'm saying is that, and I know there's just a little bit about this, where there's a particular facility in Irvington that the children would interact during the day, I guess, on that facility's campus, but then at night would get on the bus and go back to Manhattan or wherever and seemingly go spend the night somewhere else. Or am I totally confused with what? Because you have this look on your face like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, because once you're in foster care, you pretty much are in a alternative living arrangement.
Now, when you say alternative,
that means that you're no longer living at home.
Absolutely not.
You're not. Once you're within foster care, and you are either living with a foster parent, which is an alternative family, or in a group facility, or in a residential treatment. Now, you can receive services in your own individual home through social services.
Can you?
Well, anybody, if you have problems and you need supports, that's what social services is for, to be able to give you supports. But when you're dealing with issues that impact the safety of children, if children are at risk for whatever the reason, whether it be their behavior is uncontrollable and they may need to come in as a PINS, which is a person in need of supervision. They're not going to school. The school can report that children have not been in school, and that's considered educational neglect. Or if children, are abused and there's some significance that abuse has taken place. So safety of children is always the primary focus for children being placed into the foster care system.
Whew. That's interesting. So you can have an individual that's in this PIN situation that's just uncontrollable. They're out of control in their neighborhood, and then you have so I want to talk about in the next 4 minutes or so that we have left. I want to talk about this whole age opt-out thing, because I do know a little bit about it, and it's just mind-boggling what could happen. Because if I think about an individual child that, let's say, for the last 10 years has been in this at the maximum level of foster care, so they're living at a facility day in and day out, 24 hours a day, and then now being thrust into this age-out thing, just seems much. So can you just give us a little bit about what that is and what happens? Because if you're dumping, hundreds of thousands of dollars into an individual, and then all of a sudden they get to an age, and then you just say, well, thank you very much, it's been nice knowing you, and just go away. And that's kind of like what happens, right?
Yeah, that is what's happening, and that is what is currently a very strong focus in child welfare, to look at the children who are aging out of the foster care system and what's happening to them. So you have a lot of children that are aging out. They're ill-prepared, which means that they don't have a job, they don't have a place to live, and what happens to them? They become homeless, they get arrested. So they become a burden to the community. So, we removed them from the family because of whatever reasons the family could not provide what needed to be provided. and we put them in a system that is supposed to be able to do what the family could not do. However, you're in a system that mandates that certain things be provided to you. So your food, your clothing, things that technically you are entitled to have. But it also, in a way, it fosters dependency, because if you decide that you don't want something, it is, you know, we have to make sure you get it.
Right.
So, you know, as it relates to food, clothing, shelter, education, those are no longer any part of your responsibility. It's the system's responsibility to make sure that you have all that. So if we're making sure that you have everything that you need, where is the boundary for you as an individual, as a child, to learn what you need? So those boundaries, you know, sort of are enmeshed, and children end up at 21 used to someone else doing everything for them, and they age out, and at 21 you are cut off. There is no such thing as 21 in one day. All right. At 21, that is it.
Right.
So, you know, for regular children who live at home, you know, when they leave and go away to college, they experience independence, but at the same time, they know that they have a family. If they fall, they have a family they can go back to. So the fear of going out on your own and exploring independence, you know, has that comfort zone. Not for children in foster care, though.
Wow. Wow. So, in the last 30 minutes or so, is there anything that you'd like to tell our audience? How do they advocate for this? And if there's any information that you'd like to share with them, how do they get a hold of you? How do they become One Accord members? You know, that kind of stuff. So.
Well, but I just like to say that children in foster care are human beings, and you know, there's very rarely is there just one child that has no relatives at all. So everyone needs to understand that African American children are overpopulating these systems, and they're going to require the African American community to reach out and really try to help them out. So, you know, if you have cousins and if family knows when somebody's having problems with their children, okay, we have to stop this whole "that's your problem, not my problem," because ultimately it's going to go around a circle, and it is going to become your problem when you're paying taxes for these services. So the children in these systems are all of our problems, because ultimately we are going to support them, whether we're supporting them in the system or whether we support them when they come out of the system. Either way, we're supporting them. So you know, my thing is that the community understands how important it is for them to eliminate this detachment that has taken place and get more involved in children in its entirety.
Well, Susan McPherson, this has been so wonderful to talk with you. I thank you very much.
I thank you.
Thank you for coming. And I'm Reginald Bush, White Plains Cap Talks. Thank you.